I think this is when I really enjoyed watching the series. The comedy in this episode was really good. I think this was a great switch up for the series. And I bet the kids in the 90s were at all, considering that this is a Christian cartoon. Archibald and Larry's dynamic in this episode was something that I didn't know I needed until I got this episode. And I won't lie, I kind of like their dynamic more than Bob and Larry's. It's a dynamic you think wouldn't work until you actually got it on screen, and they pulled it off. That was a chef kiss, by the way. I think what stops this episode from being any lower on the list is that they choose to put Junior in so much of the episode. That's not to say it's a bad episode. It's not. And this is a really great outing for the first episode of Larry Boy.
I am that hero!
This episode is definitely the lamest of the best, which means it's better than the best of the lamest. That's also a good thing nonetheless. Okay, that whole sentence was just confusing. This episode is actually the first appearance of Larry Boy, which makes this episode go up way higher. Anyways, this episode was pretty entertaining and genuinely funny, and I enjoyed the story personally of David having to prove himself. It's a lesson that will resonate with a lot of people, whether you're young or old. Junior was definitely the perfect role for this episode, bringing heart to it. The main setback for me, though, personally, was the pacing in this episode. It was super fast. Like, you don't need many set pieces to tell a story, but like, dang, there's only like 3 places. And maybe that was the point. Maybe it was less about the fight and more how Junior had to prove himself and show everyone that he could do anything they could, despite his size. And that just popped up into my head. And so that's why I like this show, because I get to get more depth from it as I get older. And that just reiterates my point that this show has a lot of heart to it, and especially this episode, because you don't really even have to be a Christian to even watch this and get something from it. And this is why it's so high on my list. There's just a lot to it. And despite that length, this is an episode that really hits home for me. And I think you should all watch it. But it's still not my favorite episode. This episode is definitely the best Larry Boy episode we've ever gotten, and this one makes me want to see a good movie based off the character. This episode was really high quality, considering that this is the late 90s, and apparently a lot of animators from different major studios worked on this episode. This episode had like a lot of good small details in it, like for instance all the different vegetables that you normally don't see. What really makes this episode stand above the rest is that Larry Boy gets most of the screen time, and he takes way more spotlight in his own episode than he did in Fib from Outer Space. He was only in like 3 minutes of the episode. And also what I said before with Fib from Outer Space, Archibald and Larry's dynamic, it's my favorite part of the episode. It's always so refreshing to see on screen, and I'm glad Archibald got to be a part of the plot, and that's much appreciated. I mean, he wasn't doing action, but he's the main reason the whole plot happened in the first place, and I'm glad they didn't just sideline him for the whole episode. This episode gets 2 thumbs up from me. This episode is without a doubt the one most people remember when thinking about classic Veggietales or the series in general. This episode has really funny tongue-in-cheek jokes. I Can Be Your Friend was a whole bop. Both of the segments in this episode have great messages presented in different ways. And I really like the messages, you know? They're both highly entertaining and heartwarming, and I've always had great memories with this one. I used to watch it on VHS at church all the time when I was a kid, so I may be biased with this episode in particular. This episode, without a shadow of a doubt, is the episode I think is when the show becomes its own identity. I think every episode after this one takes a lot from this episode in terms of inspiration and jokes and things. Ask anyone who's seen this show, they'll probably remember Be your friend. I can be your friend. Or
Not fair, not fair, no hair, not fair, nowhere, no hair, not fair, not fair, not fair.
Heck, people in the 90s thought the Hairbrush song was the best song out of all of them. And I kind of agree. This is definitely one of the most iconic episodes to date of the series. This is definitely the warmest episode of Veggietales. But before we start, Netflix, what were you thinking when you did this? You ruined everything. This is also one of the lessons that I think even an adult watching could pull from as something to take away, especially in today's society. It's super important. Although Madam Blueberry can be kind of annoying, still super sympathetic when learning her flaws and what she really wants. We definitely can't go without mentioning Bob and Larry in this episode. They're really great and entertaining in the sideman role in this episode, with Larry bringing a lot of the slapstick to the table. And I love slapstick comedy. I haven't even mentioned his cheeseburger. That's a whole jam. Can we talk about Mr. Lunt's design? Like, why doesn't he have eyes? They never explain it. This is a stellar episode with more pros than cons and has one of my favorite endings of any episode in the series. I hope you all can check it out if you haven't. Before we get to number one, could you please subscribe, please? And turn on my notifications for when I post a video, please. It helps. And also, could you like? This is definitely without a doubt the best episode of Veggietales. The scale of the cast in this one. There's so many different types of characters with different character traits. So most of the jokes are different, but most of them actually hit instead of missing the mark. This episode has the best songs out of any episode, without a doubt. The creators definitely put their best foot forward when making this episode, and it shows. Love that most of the cast gets moments in this episode to shine, or either make a joke or have a moment. This feels like a culmination of the series as a whole, and I believe this is the best episode of the 90s Veggietales, without a doubt. Thanks for watching, YouTube. Peace.